Jorge Mario Bergoglio's decision to join the priesthood was neither sudden nor impulsive. It was the culmination of years of introspection, spiritual growth, and a deeply rooted sense of duty. Born into a family of Italian immigrants, Jorge was imbued with strong Catholic values from an early age. His parents, Mario and Regina, instilled in him a deep respect for faith, service, and humility. Yet it wasn't until his late teenage years that he began to feel the intense, undeniable pull of the vocation. The process was gradual, like a seed planted in fertile soil, nurtured by the experiences of his youth and the example set by those around him. Jorge's early life was marked by a blend of academic curiosity and a love for sports, especially soccer. He was known for his intellectual acuity and his social nature, always willing to help others with their studies or offer advice when needed. But as he grew older, a more spiritual side of him began to emerge. He would often attend Mass with his family, taking time after to reflect in the quiet of the church. It was here, in the sanctuary of God's presence, that Jorge began to sense a calling that he could not ignore. The priesthood, to him, represented a life dedicated to others, a way to serve God and the community in a way that transcended the personal ambitions that many of his peers chased. The turning point came when Jorge, at the age of 21, experienced a personal crisis of sorts. The pressures of growing up in a turbulent Argentina, coupled with his increasing sense of spiritual yearning, led him to question his path. What was his purpose in life? What role was he to play in the world? It was during this period of searching that Jorge visited a local priest, Father Zorzi, who became a guiding figure in his life. Their conversations focused on the meaning of faith, service, and the priestly calling, offering Jorge the clarity he had been seeking. Father Zorzi's mentorship and spiritual guidance helped Jorge understand that the priesthood wasn't just a career or a set of duties. It was a profound, sacred commitment to living a life in accordance with God's will. Jorge's decision to enter the seminary wasn't immediately supported by everyone around him, especially his mother, Regina. While she had always nurtured his spiritual life, the idea of him leaving the family to live a life of celibacy and seclusion was hard to accept. Yet, Maria Elena, his younger sister, recalls that Regina, despite her reservations, came to understand that Jorge's path was one he had to walk for himself. The family, though initially apprehensive, eventually rallied behind him, understanding that this was not a decision born of impulse, but one forged from deep inner conviction. In 1958, Jorge entered the Society of Jesus, beginning his formation as a Jesuit. This was a pivotal moment in his life, not just because of the rigorous intellectual training he would undergo, but because of the spiritual transformation that came with it. The Jesuit order, with its emphasis on intellectual rigor, social justice, and the education of the mind and soul, aligned perfectly with Jorge's evolving understanding of his role in the world. He would spend the next several years studying philosophy, theology, and languages, immersing himself in the works of great theologians and thinkers, while at the same time grappling with his own sense of identity and purpose. As Jorge progressed in his seminary studies, his spiritual life deepened, and his sense of vocation became clearer. His relationship with God was no longer just a matter of following external rules and rituals. It was a living, breathing relationship, one that required constant nurturing and devotion. This inner transformation was evident to those around him, especially his Jesuit superiors, who recognized in him a rare combination of intellectual acumen, humility, and deep faith. Jorge's devotion to the poor, his work with marginalized communities, and his commitment to social justice made him stand out even among his fellow seminarians. Over time, Jorge's decision was solidified. His life was no longer a matter of personal choice, but a divine calling, one that he would answer with every fiber of his being. He was ordained a priest in 1969, and soon after, he took on greater responsibilities within the Jesuit community. The quiet and humble young man who had once stood at the threshold of the seminary had transformed into a dedicated servant of God, ready to embrace the challenges and demands of the priesthood. His commitment to the priestly life was not just about fulfilling duties or obligations. It was a deep, personal vocation, a journey of faith and service that would define the rest of his life. Maria Elena Bergoglio and her brother Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would later become Pope Francis, grew up in a modest yet deeply devout Catholic household in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The youngest of 5 siblings, Maria Elena was born in 1948, the daughter of Mario Bergoglio, an Italian immigrant, and Regina Maria Svor, a homemaker of Italian descent. The family's story began long before their lives in Argentina, rooted in the struggles of their father, Mario, who fled Italy in 1929 to escape Benito Mussolini's fascist regime. Seeking a better life, he immigrated to South America with his wife, Regina, carrying with them the hopes of a brighter future for their children. Life in Buenos Aires was not easy. Mario worked tirelessly as a railway accountant to support the family, while Regina managed the household and cared for their children, Alberto, Oscar, Marta, Jorge, and Maria Elena. The family lived humbly, never having much material wealth, but their parents' unwavering faith and dedication ensured that their home was rich in love and values. Regina often emphasized humility and compassion, teaching her children to treat everyone with kindness, regardless of their circumstances. Mario, on the other hand, instilled in them the importance of hard work and integrity, qualities that would deeply shape Jorge's and Maria Elena's futures. Maria Elena, being the youngest, grew up surrounded by the care and protection of her older siblings, particularly Jorge, who took on a fatherly role after their father's untimely death. As a child, Maria Elena recalls her brother as both a guide and a protector. Jorge, despite his own responsibilities, always found time to help his siblings with their studies, offer advice, and ensure they felt supported during difficult times. His ability to lead with quiet strength and selflessness became apparent even in his youth, a reflection of the values their parents had instilled in him. The Bergoglio household was a lively one, with a constant interplay of laughter, faith, and the daily struggles of life in a bustling Argentine city. Regina often shared stories of their Italian heritage, fostering a strong connection to their roots. The children grew up speaking Spanish, but their mother frequently reminded them of their ancestry, weaving Italian phrases into their conversations and cooking traditional dishes that linked them to their homeland. This dual cultural identity created a unique sense of belonging, blending the traditions of Italy with the vibrancy of Argentine life. Maria Elena vividly remembers the small yet meaningful rituals that defined their family's faith. Every evening, they gathered to pray, a practice that strengthened their bond and instilled a deep sense of devotion in each of them. Sunday Mass was a non-negotiable part of their week, and Regina's gentle insistence on these traditions left a lasting imprint. Jorge, in particular, embraced these moments with an intensity that stood out even among his devout siblings. Maria Elena recalls how, even as a teenager, he carried a small Bible with him wherever he went, often reading passages aloud to his family, or reflecting on their meaning during quiet moments. Though the Bergoglio family faced financial challenges, their parents ensured that education was a priority. They believed that learning was the key to a better future, and all the children were encouraged to pursue their studies diligently. Jorge showed a particular aptitude for science and an early interest in chemistry, which led him to briefly work as a chemist before his calling to the priesthood became undeniable. Maria Elena, observing her brother's intellectual curiosity and spiritual depth, sensed that he was destined for something greater. Their household was not without its struggles, but it was these very challenges that forged the resilience and faith that defined their lives. The loss of their father was a profound moment, especially for Maria Elena, who was still a child when it happened. Jorge stepped into the void, becoming a pillar of strength for his siblings and their mother. His sacrifices, whether through taking on extra jobs to support the family or simply being a source of comfort, left an indelible mark on Maria Elena, who often speaks of his unwavering dedication with deep gratitude. For Maria Elena, their shared upbringing was the foundation of everything they would become. The values instilled by their parents, humility, compassion, and resilience, shaped not only Jorge's path to the priesthood and eventually the papacy, but also Maria Elena's quiet strength as his sister. Their family story is one of perseverance, faith, and love, a testament to the enduring power of a strong foundation built on shared values. Maria Elena carries these memories with her, a reminder of the simple yet profound legacy left by their parents and the bond that continues to unite their family, even as Jorge became one of the most influential figures in the world. Faith and family were cornerstones in Jorge Mario Bergoglio's life. and their role in shaping his path toward the priesthood cannot be overstated. From an early age, George was raised in a devout Catholic household, where the principles of faith, humility, and service were not just discussed but lived. His parents, Mario and Regina, both of Italian descent, were deeply committed to their Catholic beliefs, and their values found their way into every aspect of their children's upbringing. They believed that faith wasn't something to be taken lightly, but was a way of life, a guiding force that dictated how one interacted with the world. For George, this foundation of faith was integral in helping him understand his own spiritual journey, and later, in supporting his decision to join the priesthood. As a child, George was profoundly influenced by his mother, Regina, who was a deeply religious woman, always participating in parish activities and maintaining a prayerful, reflective life. She would often take him and his siblings to Mass, where they would experience the rituals of the Catholic faith, from the Eucharist to the sacrament of reconciliation. These early experiences in the church would leave a lasting impression on George, embedding within him a sense of reverence and awe for the sacred. However, his father Mario, though also religious, had a more reserved and practical approach to faith. He was a man of few words but of great actions. His quiet devotion and steady commitment to his family and faith were also critical influences on George's spiritual formation. Yet, faith for George was not merely something inherited from his parents, it became a personal journey of discovery and conviction. He often spoke of how he felt the presence of God in the quiet moments of prayer, during his walks through the city of Buenos Aires, and in the interactions with those around him. It was in these quiet moments of introspection that George began to feel a sense of calling, as though God had placed a purpose in his heart, a purpose that went beyond the material and personal ambitions of his youth. The depth of his faith, though still in its formative stages, began to set him on a path that would ultimately lead to the priesthood. But even as George wrestled with the idea of a religious vocation, his family's support remained unwavering. His parents, while initially unsure of the full extent of his calling, provided the emotional and spiritual foundation he needed to make such a life-changing decision. Maria Elena, his younger sister, often recalled the way George's family rallied around him, even when they didn't fully understand his decision to become a priest. His mother, in particular, was deeply concerned about his choice to enter the seminary, as it meant he would be leaving the family home. However, she saw in his eyes the same devotion to God that had guided her own life, and ultimately, she gave her blessing. His father, too, though reserved in his expression, stood behind him, proud of his son's commitment to his faith. The unwavering family support did not end with his immediate family. George's extended family, including aunts, uncles, and cousins, also played a crucial role in shaping his view of faith and community. Family gatherings were often filled with conversations about the importance of helping others, about living with integrity, and about the role of faith in the world. These gatherings became a place for George to see the interplay between personal devotion and community responsibility. His family instilled in him a sense of belonging, a recognition that one's faith is not just a private matter, but something that is shared with and reflected in the lives of others. As George grew older and moved into the seminary, his faith and his family's support remained intertwined. It was this foundation that helped him navigate the challenges of seminary life and the demands of the priesthood. Though his journey was one of self-discovery, it was also shaped by the constant, grounding presence of his family. In many ways, they were the silent supporters of his vocation, their love and faith a steady source of strength that kept him grounded, even as he faced the rigorous demands of religious life. In the seminary, George encountered new spiritual mentors who further deepened his understanding of faith, but the values instilled in him by his family remained the bedrock of his vocation. His family's example of living out their faith in small, everyday actions through acts of charity, through love, and through service was mirrored in his own life as he began to minister to others. The church, for George, was not a distant institution but a living, breathing community of believers, a family of faith that extended beyond the walls of any building. In his later years, as Jorge Mario Bergoglio became Pope Francis, he often spoke about the importance of family in the context of the church. He highlighted the role of family in nurturing faith, in passing down values, and in supporting one another through life's struggles. His own experiences with faith and family had taught him that the strength of the church lies not just in its doctrine but in its people, in their willingness to love, serve, and care for each other. His journey to the priesthood was shaped by this understanding, by the belief that faith is something that is nurtured in community, and that family is the first place where that faith is formed and strengthened. Pope Francis' rise to the papacy was a remarkable journey, one that saw him become the first pope from the Americas, and the first Jesuit to hold the position. Jorge Mario Bergoglio's trajectory through the church was marked by his humility, personal dedication, and deep commitment to serving the poor, qualities that set him apart in the eyes of many. His path was not one of immediate recognition or rapid ascension, but rather a steady climb built on a foundation of faith and service. His time as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires was pivotal in shaping his reputation and preparing him for the role he would eventually assume on the world stage. Bergoglio's approach to leadership was marked by a sense of simplicity and approachability. As Archbishop, he was known for living simply, often forgoing the luxurious accommodations available to him, and making an effort to connect with ordinary people. His preference for humility over grandeur resonated with the faithful, and his outreach to marginalized communities became a cornerstone of his identity. He was seen as a man of the people, more concerned with the practical aspects of faith and service than with the trappings of ecclesiastical power. His election as Pope in 2013, following the unexpected resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, took the world by surprise. Few had predicted that Bergoglio, a relatively unknown figure outside of Argentina, would be chosen to lead the Catholic Church. However, his reputation for humility, pastoral care, and his vision for a church focused on compassion and mercy made him an ideal candidate. His election marked the beginning of a new era for the Catholic Church, one that emphasized the importance of addressing social justice, poverty, and inequality. However, Pope Francis' rise was not without its challenges, particularly in relation to the media. His unorthodox approach to leadership and his willingness to challenge established norms often placed him in the spotlight, sometimes in controversial ways. The media, which had long been accustomed to a more traditional papacy, quickly scrutinized his every move. His openness to discussing sensitive issues, such as homosexuality, climate change, and economic inequality, led to widespread media coverage, both positive and negative. His remarks, sometimes interpreted as progressive, caused friction within more conservative factions of the church, but also endeared him to many outside of it, particularly among younger generations. The media attention that Pope Francis received was at once a blessing and a burden. On the one hand, it allowed him to reach a global audience with his message of mercy and reform. On the other, it subjected him to constant analysis and critique. His willingness to speak candidly on controversial subjects often led to headlines that portrayed him as a pope willing to challenge the status quo. Some critics within the church viewed his comments as too radical, questioning whether his calls for change would undermine traditional teachings. Others saw him as a beacon of hope for a church in need of renewal, a leader who was unafraid to address the issues that many had avoided for decades. Despite the intense media scrutiny, Pope Francis remained focused on his mission. He sought to bring attention to issues that had long been ignored by both the church and society, including poverty, the environment, and human rights. His encyclical Laudato Si', which called for urgent action on climate change, was met with both praise and criticism, particularly from political and corporate leaders who saw it as a challenge to the status quo. Yet for Pope Francis, these challenges were part of the broader mission of the Church to serve humanity and protect the planet. As the years went on, Pope Francis continued to evolve as a leader. His media presence, while often polarizing, helped to redefine what it meant to be the Pope in the modern age. No longer simply a religious figurehead, Pope Francis became a global symbol of compassion, dialogue, and social justice. His rise to power, marked by a blend of humility, service, and media attention, reshaped the public's perception of the papacy, offering a glimpse into a church that was willing to engage with the world in new, and sometimes controversial ways. In doing so, Pope Francis not only solidified his place in history, but also demonstrated the power of the papacy as a tool for global change. Pope Francis' tenure has been marked not only by his progressive messages but also by the numerous false narratives and misunderstandings that have surrounded his leadership. From the very beginning of his papacy, rumors and misconceptions about his statements and intentions began to circulate, often fueled by misinterpretations of his words or deliberate distortion by critics. These false narratives ranged from accusations of heresy to claims that he was undermining church traditions and teachings. As a result, Pope Francis has had to repeatedly defend both his actions and his character, addressing the misrepresentations that sometimes obscured his true message. One of the most persistent false narratives about Pope Francis is that he is a liberal or progressive pope who seeks to radically alter the traditional doctrines of the Church. This narrative was often amplified by conservative factions within the Church, who interpreted his calls for greater inclusion and social justice as an attack on established doctrine. His remarks on issues like climate change, economic inequality, and migration were often spun as politically motivated or contrary to Church teachings. However, Pope Francis has consistently reaffirmed his commitment to the Church's core values, emphasizing mercy, compassion, and the importance of dialogue over division. Another false narrative that Pope Francis has had to combat is the portrayal of him as being soft on controversial issues such as sexual ethics or the handling of the clergy sexual abuse crisis. Critics have claimed that his efforts to reform the Vatican and address abuse within the Church were insufficient, or that he was not taking a strong enough stance. In response, Pope Francis has taken concrete steps to hold abusers accountable and has initiated reforms aimed at greater transparency and justice. His establishment of a commission to investigate abuse cases and his consistent public statements calling for justice for victims have shown his commitment to confronting these issues head-on. In defending against these false narratives, Pope Francis has often turned to his key themes of humility and service. He has consistently reminded the faithful and the media that his focus is not on changing doctrine for the sake of popularity, but on the mission of the Church to serve the marginalized and promote peace. By reiterating his core beliefs, he has sought to clarify misconceptions while also remaining steadfast in his mission of reform. In doing so, Pope Francis has turned his defense into an opportunity to further communicate the heart of his papacy, a commitment to truth, compassion, and the pursuit of justice.